Chapter 9. Chapter you've all been waiting for. Nah, just kidding. So, this chapter, actually, I want to go back a little bit. In the last chapter, they started to talk about different forms of food production. Well, then they veered off into political organization and social control. Next thing you know, we're talking about hegemony and how to govern complex societies. So I want to go back to some of what might consider the basics of human food production and some terms that anthropologists usually use. Our textbook skips over this a little bit, but I just wanted to put these out there because they're common ways of thinking about how people get their food. So we did talk about hunting and gathering, what is also known as foraging, although I'm not so excited about the term foraging. It makes it sound like people are just scrounging around for food. But hunting and gathering, a sophisticated system of, or we should say, all kinds of different ways in which people got their food before agriculture. And it was the main and probably the longest and most sustainable form of food production that humans have ever had, and enabled humans to spread out into all areas of the world. In different parts of the world, people develop what we call horticulture, or small-scale cultivation and farming. Might do a little bit of planting, a little bit of hunting and gathering as well. And this is something that is still practiced in many parts of the world. We might just consider it gardening, getting your food from small gardens. In some parts of the world, and in general, this form of food production developed after plant domestication, called pastoralism, also known as herding animals, so that most of your food would come from the animals that you herd. Now, you can't live exclusively on herding animals. People who are pastoralists are always trading around with people who do agriculture. And at various points in human history, people have intensified their agricultural production. So using plows and other techniques to try and really maximize the production from the soil. This can maximize production, but it also has some drawbacks. It can also deplete the soil and lead to environmental issues. These food production systems in general map onto something our textbook did talk about in terms of political organization. That is to say that people who are hunters and gatherers generally organize themselves as bands, small, mobile bands of people who have a pretty fluid structure. For horticulture, that's where you usually use the term tribes, although again, I said that's a very specific use of the word tribe. So larger grouping, we might call villages often. Pastoralism, that's often what are organized as something we would call chiefdoms. So you would have a herding society, which is under what we would call a chief. Intensive agriculture is usually associated with more extensive forms of government, like state governments that we talked about in the last class, or cities. It's very difficult to have a city if you don't have an agricultural base which is supporting the life of urban people. So this is generally how people have produced their food, and like we discussed in the last class, there's not necessarily an evolution between these forms. People take them up from time to time. They go back and forth. They join different groups. They use different methods. It doesn't clearly map onto any progressive idea of human history, both in political and social organization for our food production. Humans do something that's a little bit different than other creatures. What are those people doing? Sharing their food. Yes, this is a fundamental feature of human cooperation, is that we tend to share food. Now, of course, we don't always do it, but it's it's an interesting thing that you shouldn't feel bad if you have to eat alone in the dining hall, but a lot of people are looking around for somebody to eat with. We generally tend, and this is something across human societies, to share our food. And on the in in one sense, this is one of the things we have talked about, how humans are always interconnected. This is something that happens on the small scale within a household or within a group, but it's also for something that people trade food around. And anthropologists consider this food sharing to be one of the basis for having an economy and being able to distribute and exchange food. But it does something else. What else do we do when we're sharing food? Building community and relationships. Yes, we often talk while we're eating and talk over food. And so it's also a form of social connection. Again, both within small households, families, people who share food, but also across different groups. That's one of the first things that people will do together. They're not going to fight each other, or the end of fighting, different ritual points in life to establish this social connection. So we have both an economic system with sharing food, but also an important social and cultural connection as well. They bring up a big word here, which they say is at the basis of these kinds of human exchanges. What do we got? Big multisyllabic word for how people exchange things around. That's the basis of reciprocity. Yeah, it's a hard word to pronounce. That's a pretty good try. It's got another T at the end, though. Yeah, maybe that's how we should pronounce it. I've heard it said most of the time reciprocity. So you'd give a little accent right there in on the O. Reciprocity. Basically exchanging things back and forth, the give and take of social life. Yeah, we tend to exchange things with each other and we give things back and forth, but we also load that up with meanings. And as you said, there's the mother-baby exchange, but humans tend to talk about and expect things from other people and detail our expectations sometimes, what we hope they will give us or what we hope to get back. And so reciprocity depends on having this social relationship with people, as we talked about with food in our society, but you might say it's the basis or one of the bases for our social relationships is this constant give and take and helping each other out. Anthropologists have talked about different types of reciprocity or different ways in which this happens. One of the ways that this happens is called generalized reciprocity, in which somebody is giving you something, there's not an expectation that you're necessarily going to pay them back. Just generalized reciprocity, or people are giving each other things and nobody's keeping a bank book of it. Is there any generalized reciprocity in our society? Where might we find generalized reciprocity? Birthdays. Well, okay. Well, let's just put up the next form of reciprocity first, and then you tell me if birthdays are more like generalized reciprocity or more like balanced reciprocity. And I'll just say it depends how old you are. So for my kids, I'm giving them generalized reciprocity on their birthdays. I don't think they're going to get me anything back. But when you get a little older, maybe you're thinking that I gave you a present on your birthday. Maybe you want to give me something back, right? So, all right. What is birthdays are possible? Yeah.
I was going to say parents to their kids.
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully, in your family, you have generalized reciprocity. Hopefully, your parents have not been charging you rent and food. Are they expecting anything back from you? I give you money, you give me what I want. Yeah, that's supposed to be an equal exchange, right? You give me something. If we'll be talking soon about markets. You're supposed to set a price, and that's supposed to be, okay, we all agree that this is enough money for that. Or you might have a form of barter in which, okay, I give you this, I give you that. That's a good example. Well, are there other examples of generalized reciprocity? Healthcare, we'll talk about healthcare in the next class a little bit. That's a different, that's often organized by the state. But, well, let's put it this way. If somebody gets sick in your life, Do you charge them for helping them out? If they have to crash on your couch for a while and just recover, you're like, dude, you owe me, man. So it can work with friends too, right? Between friends, you're not necessarily gonna tally that. Hopefully, there's a little bit of back and forth here. Sure, yeah, that can be a form of reciprocity, right? I would definitely get a lot out of your comments. I don't know if we get anything from me, but hopefully you get a degree someday. That's reciprocity. You pay money, you study, then you get a degree back. I don't know if that's balanced. Is that balanced? Or is that negative? Another form of reciprocity in which you're trying to get something for less than its value or something for nothing. Some people think going to college is negative reciprocity. Kara, you laughed. Why would people think that?
College is expensive in the United States for a reason. I mean, I don't think it should be this expensive. It's kind of ridiculous, but people who are arguing that, you don't need that. You just need to get a job and have real life world experience. But that is something you do get in college and build your skills and learn more and everything.
Yeah, I don't want to go too far into this because I don't want to make anybody drop out. But there are some people who are like, I'm going to pay X amount of money to go to your school and I come out in debt and barely having a degree, or maybe I dropped out. That sounds like negative reciprocity to me. You're not getting enough for value for your money. So there's different kinds or different ways we can think about reciprocity. Is there any among your friends? Do you do any balanced reciprocity? Yeah, you have to fill up their gas tank every so often if you're going out a lot. Yeah, the ways people split things up. Venmo makes this kind of more exchanging, being able to do this balance. Jaw, did you have an? So you rotate it around. Yeah, right. So what happens though? Well, let me ask you this. What happens if you're rotating it around and then all of a sudden one of your friends is like, all right, we're going out to this super fancy restaurant and buys everybody the whole meal. Now, on the one hand, you can say that person's lost, but have they gained anything by buying you all a meal? And you'll never be able to pay them back because it's too expensive for you. I don't know, this sounds too hypothetical. You're all staring at me like I'm nuts. Has it ever happened that somebody's given you something and you can't repay it, and it doesn't quite make you feel great? Or if it does make you feel great, well, go ahead, Joe. If somebody does that, they've elevated their status. When your friends are coming to you for help with their papers, how does that make you feel? It makes you feel you're elevating your status, man. You got a good reputation here, and especially if they then get a good grade, hey, you're going up in the world, right? So gift giving can actually be a way in which we also negotiate our status within a society. And if you are able to give certain things, people sometimes use that. And so actually our textbook says that sometimes people in a situation, yeah, it makes you feel shitty because you're like, oh man, I'm down here in the poor land. Yes, so I believe what you were talking about specifically, though, is somebody who is a sociopath. And maybe that is a form of mental illness. I don't know that person, but they will probably never seek help. But yes, a sociopath who keeps taking advantage of you over time. Then you're very much in the realm of negative reciprocity. The person who always forgets their wallet or their phone when it's time to go out, and I don't know what happened, I can't pay you back. Yeah, over time, try to stay away from the sociopaths. Yeah, that's based on social distance. So we've talked about within a family or households, your close friends, you might have generalized reciprocity, but out there in the world, you're not going to give somebody for nothing because you have balance. But in wider society, when there's greater social distance, then it becomes negative reciprocity. This is useful as a way to think about things. I don't know. Every so often, though, I think about families where everybody's trying to cheat each other and get things from each other. So I don't know if this always applies to families. And sometimes people, as humans, we tend to be nicer to strangers. Well, sometimes we can be nicer to strangers out in wider society, but it's an interesting way to think about things. Your textbook talks about how oftentimes reciprocity is used as a social insurance. So you give somebody something, you're not necessarily expecting anything back, but you're hoping if a hard time comes, if all of a sudden you're struggling to write a paper, you might be able to go to that person and be like, hey, remember when I helped you out? So there's different ways in which we can think about or use reciprocity. Your textbook gives you this on page 258, a graph of different exchange systems and modes of production. So we've talked about here, we've been talking about forms of reciprocity. Again, oldest form of human exchange, you have the give and take of these. And it hasn't disappeared from our own society, of course, but in some ways, there are other forms. In the next class, we're going to be talking more about the system of redistribution and different ways in which things go to a centralized place and then flow out. Sometimes healthcare is a form of redistribution in which people pay taxes or people pay a percentage, and then you're supposed to get something from a healthcare system. That's usually seen as a form of redistribution. In the next part of this chapter, we're going to talk about markets. Now, I've already been talking a little bit about markets. Jaw gave us the example of you give me money, or I give you money and you give me something back in return that is basically supposed to be of relatively equal value, or at least what we consider to be balanced. And there's a little more social distance between, you don't necessarily charge your friend for your services. There's going to be more social distance between those.